Hello and welcome to Storytelling. It seems that cheating on a man is the worst thing a woman can do to him, even if she truly believes she loves him. Mark Hurley sat in the dark, by himself, thinking about that. He thought he had it all just a few hours ago, a wonderful job with a respectable company that paid well, a lovely home, and a devoted wife. The first two were still with him, but the third was a different story. He reflected on his life with his wife of almost 5 years, Allison. She had just joined the Marcus Financial Group, a firm that assists small businesses with their finances, where he works, when he first got to know her. She began her career, like so many others, in the administrative support department, handling all the tedious clerical tasks required for their business transactions. About 7 months ago, she moved on to work as Jake Marcus' executive assistant. Jake's last name, Marcus, is no accident. His grandfather founded the business many years ago and passed it on to his son Alan, who serves as CEO today. After Alan's son Jake graduated from college a few years ago, he was brought into the company and given the same start as everyone else so he could pick up the necessary skills. After doing so, he was swiftly elevated to his current role as regional manager, where he is solely accountable to Alan and the board of directors. Of course, Jake would take over as CEO eventually, but that would take years. Mark respected and liked Alan. After sustaining injuries in Iraq, Alan assisted him in readjusting to civilian life and served as a sort of father figure. Mark was receiving physical therapy when they first got together. Having just concluded a meeting with the facilities board, Alan took a break to observe the former Marine as he exercised. That day, Alan bought Mark lunch because he saw something in him. That lunch meeting covered a wide range of topics, and Alan was shocked to hear that Mark had completed his 4-year business degree just days before he was sent to Iraq. The young Marine impressed Alan, who immediately offered him a job. Taken aback, Mark agreed to the deal and started working for Alan the following Monday. It was nearly 8 years ago. After concluding his therapy, Mark concentrated on his career and attended night classes to earn his MBA. Then Allison entered the picture. The moment he saw her for the first time, he fell in love. He asked her out on a date after making sure HR wouldn't take any action. After a few months of dating, they fell in love and were married. Mark was taken aback when Alan offered to pay for their Hawaiian honeymoon. After getting married, Alan brought Jake along 3 years later. Although Mark had anticipated that Jake had picked up some traits from the elderly man, he quickly discovered that wasn't the case. Jake enjoyed teasing people by revealing to them his father's name and the fact that one day he would occupy the large corner office on the top floor. In some way, Jake alienated almost everyone in his vicinity. Alan confided in Mark about his son one day, sharing the same worry that Mark had heard from others. "You know, I'm going to have to make him the regional manager at some point, Mark," said Alan. "I know. I'm counting on you to lead by example. Maybe you can help Jake transition into the job a bit," Alan replied. "Think you can do that?" "I think so, Alan. It won't be easy, though." "What's your honest appraisal of him, Mark?" replied Alan. "Don't bullshit me. Forget he's my son. Tell it to me straight, okay?" "I will, Alan," declared Mark. "He's too full of himself to be effective, in my opinion. He refuses to listen to others, spends far too much time flirting with the girls, and likes to throw his name around. Allison tells me he's pretty much a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. He not only likes to chase the women, he likes to brag about it as well." Alan gave a headshake. "I was afraid of that. His mother doted on him from the time he was born, let him get away with darn near everything. I had hoped bringing him on board might help him mature a bit. I'll have a talk with him." "So, when is Bill going to retire?" replied Alan. The current regional manager, Bill Collins, had been with the company for many years and was well liked by all. He had been discussing retirement for some time and had purchased a property in North Idaho in order to retire in the country with his spouse while he was still young enough to have fun. Sometime in the next 6 months or so. He's dead set on it. "Personally, I don't blame him," Mark responded. Alan promised to keep in touch as he left the office. Mark was confident that he would fulfill his promise. Mark noticed additional qualities in Jake that he kept hidden from the elderly man. Upon reflection, he concluded that he probably ought to have. A few months after that conversation, Bill retired, and Alan promoted Jake to take his place. Jake quickly started to make adjustments. While Mark was confident about some of them, he wasn't so sure about others. Still, he carried on with his work and made an effort to avoid giving Jake too much trouble. As he got more comfortable in the role, Jake did change, but Mark wasn't impressed. Jake had a propensity for micromanaging, which frequently irritated the team's more seasoned members. He also enjoyed moving people around a lot, sometimes placing them in situations that were practically guaranteed to fail. A little over 7 months ago, Jake entered Mark's office one day. He sat down in the chair across from Mark, who was talking on the phone with a customer. Mark looked up to see Jake grinning at him after the call ended. Mark inquired, "What can I do for you, Jake?" "I've been thinking about hiring a new EA," he stated, "and I think Allison would fit that role quite nicely." With a smile that never went away, Jake nodded his head and asked, "My wife, Allison?" "One and the same," he declared. "What's wrong with Gretchen?" "Bill's executive assistant for many years, Gretchen Wilson." "Nothing. It's just that she's looking to retire, and the office could use some new blood," Jake replied. Mark said to himself, "Aha, more like eye candy for Jake." Mark questioned, "Have you talked to Allison about it?" "Not just yet," he replied. "I wanted to get with you first." "Oh, I appreciate that, but why?" "I wanted to know what she's like. After all, you live with her, you sleep with her every night. I mean, is she witchy and demanding, or is she always the happy, bubbly type? Is she playful or serious? I want to know what I'm in for if I bring her in." Mark was really not liking the direction this conversation was taking. "Well, Jake," Mark replied, "first of all, Allison and I are very happily married. And yes, she's always a joy to be around. Second of all, she's married to me. Third, she's a professional. If you think she's qualified for the job, then offer it to her. Whether she accepts or not is up to her. But the most important thing to remember is this: she's married to me." Mark intentionally repeated himself to ensure that Jake comprehended what he meant. "I get it. You've probably heard the gossip and you're concerned. I would be too if I was married to someone as beautiful as Allison. If she takes the job, it would mean travel, sometimes overnight. Are you okay with that? I trust my wife. If she accepts the job knowing that's part of it, then she knows the boundaries. And I expect you to respect those boundaries in my marriage, of course, Mark, old buddy," Jake said with a never-ending smirk. "I know you and my old man are tight. He respects you, and so do I. Believe me, I'd never do anything to get between you and Allison." "I hope not," Mark remarked. "Who knows, Jake, there might even be a promotion in it for you as well." Mark spoke with Allison that evening. He asked her as she was putting the finishing touches on their dinner, "Did you speak with Jake today?" "Indeed," she replied. "He mentioned something about wanting me to be his new EA. He said, and what do you think about that?" "Well, it would mean some travel and probably some late hours, but it would also mean a nice raise. We could certainly use the extra money, especially if we're going to have children someday." "Why are you concerned about something?" "I just remember you telling me that he was a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. Do you still feel the same way?" "I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't concerned," she replied. "I do hear all the rumors, you know." He asked, glancing at her, "Do you trust me?" before responding. "Of course, I trust you," he replied, "but I trust him about as far as I can throw him. He came by my office today and asked how you were at home. I thought it was a bit impertinent, personally." Her eyebrows shot up as she said, "That's just the way he is." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you're a joy to be around, and I meant it. I also let it be known that you and I are happily married, and I would expect him to respect that." "I would expect nothing less myself," he stated. "Good.
So, are you going to take the job?
I believe so, she said. That evening, they made love in bed and went to sleep. She accepted the position and, as expected, disappeared for up to 2 days at a time, at least once every 2 weeks. Additionally, she found herself working late 3 nights a week. Mark did everything he could to help Allison in her new role and handled the situation as best he could. Though he watched closely, he didn't notice anything that would indicate she wasn't acting professionally in her new role. Then, a little over 3 months ago, the unimaginable occurred. One day, Alan had a massive stroke in his office. He was taken to the hospital immediately after paramedics were called, but he did not survive the night. Never having recovered consciousness, he passed away. The news devastated everyone in the company, and many of them came to his funeral. Mark and Allison expressed surprise at the large number of attendees. After his father passed away unexpectedly, Jake assumed he would take over as CEO right away by moving into Alan's office, but the board of directors disagreed, stating that Jake lacked the necessary experience for such a position. In spite of Jake's strong protests, the board appointed David Matt as an acting CEO until a suitable successor could be found. After that, Jake had a transformation and decided to show that he was capable of leading. Allison was forced to work alongside him almost every weekend on out-of-town trips, and he had her working until late most nights. Whether or not Mark and Allison had plans, the demands of their schedule were wearing them both down, and their marriage suffered as a result. To begin with, their sexual life virtually vanished. He also saw that Allison's wardrobe had changed. She had been dressing more provocatively, whereas she had usually worn business and professional attire. Furthermore, her perspective on him had evolved a little. She had always been bubbly, gregarious, respectful, and outgoing, but lately she had become a little more demanding, irritable, and had begun making small jabs at him. Maybe it was just the stress of her work, he thought. At last, he sat Allison down for a conversation one Sunday after she got back from a weekend trip to New York. He heard an edge in Allison's voice and said, "Allison, we need to talk about us. I rarely ever see you anymore. This schedule Jake has you on is not just killing you, it's killing us. We need to take some time off and reconnect. I'm sorry, but Jake has a lot going on right now. Things are crazy. I can't help it. Tell Jake you're taking a week's vacation. You have the time. We need to do this if we're going to survive." For a short while, Allison kept quiet to gather her thoughts. He knew she was bothered by this, too. She gave a final nod of her head. "You're right, Mark. I could use a break. Jake's been running me ragged these last 3 months. I'll talk to him tomorrow, promise." Allison arrived home the following day in a better mood than he had seen her in a while. Mark inquired, "What happened?" "I talked to Jake, like I told you, and he agreed we need to take a breather. He said we could both take next week off if we want, so long as we attend a party at his place Friday night." Mark asked, "What kind of party? And who all is going to be there?" "It's just a little get-together with him and some of his friends," she continued. This did not sit well with Mark. He didn't think it was appropriate for him to be out having fun with his boss, in addition to the fact that he really didn't care for the little twerp. As they say, familiarity breeds disdain. Besides, he had no idea who else would be attending this gathering. "Do you know any of these people?" She remarked, "I've met some of them. They're mostly friends of his from college, but 1 or 2 of them work for clients. I don't know who else is coming, though." "Well, all right, but only if you can get home at a normal hour this week." "Can you do that?" "I think so. We do have to work on the Henderson account on Wednesday, though. Jake is having a dinner meeting with him, and he wants me to be there." Mark knew about the manufacturing account for Henderson. Since Alan had begun to handle it prior to his stroke, it had taken on a degree of importance. "Okay, Wednesday night. But the rest of the week, I want you home at a normal hour. Deal?" With a smile, she encircled him with her arms. Whispering, "Deal," she planted a kiss on his lips. When Jake arrived at Mark's office the following afternoon, he took his customary seat in front of the desk across from Mark. He was grinning as always, that never-ending smile. Mark inquired, "What can I do for you, Jake?" Jake said, "Ally tells me you guys are on for Friday night," making Mark cringe on the inside. "You were right, Ally is a joy to be with. I appreciate you letting her take the time she needs to do her job without giving her a lot of crap. She's quite good at what she does. Frankly, I'd be lost without her." It was a bit too much for Mark to take. "I'm glad you're satisfied with her work, Jake," he replied. "One thing, though," inquired Jake. "Do you call her Ally to her face?" "Of course, why?" "Just curious, that's all." He brought it up to Allison during their meal that evening. "Do you always let Jake call you Ally?" he inquired. "I'm just curious because you never let me call you that." "I figure he's my boss, and he can call me whatever he wants," Allison stated. Even after Mark dropped it, it irritated him. With the exception of Wednesday night, the remainder of the week went fairly well. She arrived home on schedule, and they took advantage of every opportunity to make love. After Mark pulled on jeans and a t-shirt that Friday, he watched Allison get ready for the celebration and took note of the dress she had chosen. It was the first time he had seen this dress, and he wondered when she got it. Compared to her previous dresses, it was considerably shorter and appeared to flaunt a lot of skin. Not to mention the thong she wore, which he had never seen before. Then, without bothering to put on a bra, she threw on the dress. There was no denying that this was unique. He looked everything over once she had put on the dress. It featured slits running up the sides from her waist to her arms, one side being shorter than the other. The back was open to a point just above her bum, almost exposing her thong, and the front showed off a lot of flesh, so he could understand why she didn't want to wear a bra. He saw her breasts bulge up against the fabric. "Wow, you look good enough to eat. Maybe we should stay home and play," he said. No, after we get home." "By the way, where did you get that dress?" replied Mark. "I've never seen it before. It sure doesn't look casual to me. I got it the last time we were in New York. Jake asked me to wear it tonight," she said. Of course, he considered, better be careful, someone might get the wrong idea. "I don't think so," she asserted. She hugged his wife and said, "Everyone knows their boundaries." She waved him away as he began to kiss her. Later, "I don't want my makeup messed up." They parked their car outside Jake's two-story townhouse, which is in a rather upscale area of town, and pressed the doorbell. Invited inside, Jake opened the door. Mark felt his heart sink when he smelled the subtle hint of marijuana. Jake brought 3 other young men who were roughly his age into the front room and introduced them to Mark. "Guys, let me introduce you to Mark Hurley, the man of the hour," exclaimed Jake, beaming broadly. "Mark, this is John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins. Alan, by the way, works for Henderson." After shaking hands with all 3 men, Mark questioned Jake's claim that he was the man of the hour. Why Jake hadn't introduced Allison to them also puzzled him. Did she know them before? Jake's eye shifted to Allison. He turned to face the other 3 men and said, "My God, Ally, you look so hot in that dress." "I knew you would." "Doesn't she look hot, guys?" With their tongues almost dragging on the ground, they all nodded. Allison turned around, grinning, as though to show them how to wear the dress. They expressed their gratitude with a whistle. She did look good, Mark had to admit, but he wasn't too fond of Jake's response. Jake questioned, "Where are my manners?" "Here, let me get you 2 something to drink." "Ally, I know you like white wine." "What about you, Mark?" "That's fine for me as well. I really don't drink much these days." Very low tolerance to alcohol, Mark responded. In all honesty, he could most likely down these bozos under the table. While serving in the Marines years ago, he almost completely gave up alcohol. Actually, he was a nasty drunk who, the last time he was intoxicated, almost killed a much bigger man with his bare hands. He vowed afterwards that it would never occur again. Jake answered, "No problem, I'll be right back." Jake returned holding 2 glasses, which he gave to Mark and Allison. Mark took tiny sips from his, while Allison took a large gulp from hers. Mark vowed to stay as sober as possible because an internal red flag was raising. He felt uneasy about something in all of this. Jake opened his living room and asked everyone to sit down. Mark decided to follow Allison and saw that she was seated in a love seat. He moved to take a seat beside her, but Jake moved before him. Rather, he sat down on a couch facing the love seat and observed his wife intently. Jake gave him a brief glance. Mark looked at his wife and said, "Sorry, old buddy, force of habit. I'm used to sitting on this side of the love seat." "No problem." Glancing back, she was unable to read his expression. They sat talking about little things for a while. Before he spoke, Jake gave Mark a quick glance. Mark nodded and said, "My dad told me you were in the Marines, is that right?" "Yeah, I served 5 years before I got a medical discharge," he replied. "Marines, hey?" questioned John. Mark nodded slowly. "I hear they're real badasses. You ever see any combat? Ever kill anyone?" he asked. When people asked that, he detested it. "Yeah," he muttered. John questioned, "What, see combat or kill anyone?" "Both," replied Mark. Allison gave him a startled look. It was something he had never told her before. Over the past few years, he has made an effort to put all of that behind him. She remarked, "You never told me that." Mark retorted, "I don't like to talk about it." George produced a sizable plastic sack. Mark identified it as marijuana. He had tried it once in high school and never really liked it, even though it was legal to buy in this state. George said, "Hey, I got some really great stuff. Do you want to give them a try?" Mark had never known Allison to smoke anything, much less marijuana. "Yeah, sure," Jake replied, and the others, including Allison, agreed. George rolled a big joint, lit it, passed it around, and the others took hits. Mark held up his hand and shook his head when Alan offered him a hit. "Thanks, but no, I never really cared for it." Alan nodded his head and passed it to Jake. Jake took a hit and looked at Mark. "You go ahead," Mark said. "I want to spend tonight with a clear head." "Man, you're lost. Additionally, this is a party. You can stay here at any time if things get too out of control." He turned to face Allison, saying, "Hell, you're going to be off next week anyway." "Shotgun?" he asked, and to Mark's surprise, she grinned and nodded enthusiastically, "Sure." With the lit joint in his mouth, Jake blew a great deal of smoke into Allison's mouth, which she opened and inhaled, coughing a little, patting her chest as she did so. "That is some good," Allison said. Jake handed the joint back to George, saying, "You know," pointing a finger at Mark, "this man is without question the best business analyst in the company." Mark was taken aback and questioned who this woman was. "Hell, he prevented us from losing millions of dollars in revenue. Not only that, but without him, I wouldn't have this lovely creature as my assistant." Allison grinned at him, and Mark noticed that her smile went beyond the typical one that one gives in appreciation. He also noticed the way she seemed to hang on to everything he said. "In fact," Jake said, turning to face Mark, "I like to think of her as my work wife." He patted Allison's bare thigh, and Mark thought he saw Jake's hands begin to inch under her short dress. For a brief moment, Mark watched Allison's face flush before Jake withdrew his hand. "Truth is, I'd be lost without her," Jake continued. After observing Jake's response, Mark remarked, "So would I," noting that Allison had momentarily turned her head to face the floor. "If you'll excuse me for just a bit, I need to use the restroom," Mark said, breaking the silence in the space. "Sure," Jake replied. "Just go down the hall, first door on the left." "Remember, son, it's not just numbers," Alan reminded him as he walked into the bathroom and locked the door behind him. Mark looked in the mirror for a moment, a million ideas racing through his mind, the foremost of which was that Allison was cheating on him with Jake. Jake was correct that Mark was an exceptionally skilled analyst, but only because he paid attention to detail. The old man told Mark, in any business deal, the devil's always hiding in the details. Pay attention to the details, trust your gut, and you'll never go wrong. Mark took the old man's advice to heart, and it consistently helped him. Now he had more details to consider. First, what Allison was wearing, or not wearing. Second, how she and Jake interacted. Third, her drug use. He had never known her to take drugs, nor had they ever even experimented with them, and here she was, accepting what Jake gave her with eagerness, and then there was her response to Jake's touch and his own words, what exactly Jake meant when he referred to her as his work wife, and finally, there were all the little annoying things he had noticed over the previous 3 months. Taken together, they portended trouble, and if he was correct, it also meant the end of his marriage. That's it, he thought, pulling out his cell phone from his shirt pocket and starting a video recording before putting it back in. He sensed that something was going to happen and knew he had to get out of there with something concrete, something he could use as proof. He thought about just taking Allison and leaving, but he had a feeling it would only cause a fight and delay the inevitable. He went to the bathroom, did his business, cleaned his hands, flushed the toilet, and steeled himself before opening the front door and seeing Allison sit up abruptly after leaning over the coffee table. He noticed a few specks of white powder on her nose and surmised that she had most likely sniffed a line of cocaine. Jake and the other 3 men also had a small amount of white powder on their noses. He picked up his glass and took a tiny sip after noticing the guilty expression on her face and realized there were undissolved powder granules in the bottom of it. What the hell? He quickly set the glass back down on the table and noticed everyone looking at him. He started to say something, but suddenly found himself very tired and unable to say anything coherent.
Are you okay?
I heard Allison ask. He looked at her, speechless, perplexed. Jake and the 3 men got to their feet. Allison got to their feet as well and took hold of Jake's arm. He stared at them all, wondering what they would do next. He tried to stand, but could not.
Mark, old friend, how about you just take a quick nap for a bit?
Jake asked, as the other men put his feet up on the couch. Mark was unable to do or say anything as Allison removed his shoes. He wanted to get up, grab her, and run out as fast as he could. He looked around, trying to find anything he could to support himself, and saw her thong on the love seat where she and Jake were sitting. The witch, he thought. He was unable to move his arms to grab Allison by the throat, so she covered him with an afghan. She leaned down and kissed him on the forehead, saying, "I'm sorry, Mark," and whispering in his ear, "I really do love you." Mark finally closed his eyes and went to sleep. After rubbing the sleep from his eyes and glancing around, he woke up to find that nobody was awake except for the sound of snoring coming from upstairs. He looked at his phone and saw that he had been gone for a little over 3 hours, so he stopped the video recording and put it back in his pocket. Making sure he stayed in the shadows, he crept upstairs and peered into the master suite, where he saw Allison naked on Jake's bed, her arm draped over his chest and one leg draped over his. One of the 3 men was naked too, lying beside Allison on the big bed, the other 2 men, asleep, one on a couch beneath the window, the other perilously propped up in an overstuffed recliner in one corner. Returning downstairs in silence, he searched Jake's kitchen for whatever it was they had dosed him with, finally finding a Tupperware container with a screw-on lid, which he filled with the drink and sealed tightly. Heading back into the front room, he took Allison's keychain from her purse and saw a key he had never seen before, which looked like a house key but wasn't one of theirs. Acting on a hunch, he pulled the key off and shoved it into his pocket, then had the bright idea to take Allison's phone and put it in his pants pocket, intending to look through it later. After removing his wedding ring and placing it carefully on top of her purse so she could see it, he put his shoes back on and slithered toward the door, thinking to himself, details. Glancing around, he saw no console or security system anywhere close to the door. Using the key he had removed from Allison's ring, he opened the front door and tried it. It fit perfectly, just as he had suspected. He locked the door behind him and got into his car, closing it as softly as possible before backing out of the driveway and departing without turning on his lights until he was on the street. Plucking an idea, he pulled into a convenience store, pulled out his phone, and looked up his old friend R.K. Evans, who had started his own private investigative firm after leaving the service. Mark had known him as Corporal Evans in the service, but all his friends just called him Ark. "Hello," a sleepy RK said when he answered the phone. "Hey, RK, it's me, Mark. Sorry to call so late, but I need your help." "What's up, Mark? You get in a bar fight and need me to bail you out or something?" "Not quite. Can you be at my place in about 15 or 20 minutes? "Yeah, sure," RK said. "Everything all right? What's going on?" "I'd rather not talk about it over the phone." "Gotcha," RK said. "I'll see you in about 20 minutes. "Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it." "Hey, Semper Fi, do or die, right?" Mark chuckled. RK liked to say that a lot. "Aura," Mark said. They ended the call, and Mark looked at the store. Screw it, he thought to himself. He bought a 12-pack of beer and a couple packs of cigarettes. He hadn't smoked since he left the service, but at this point, he felt he needed to do something before he punched something or someone out. He got home and put the beer in his refrigerator, grabbing one for himself. He opened a pack of cigarettes and lit one up after he sat on the couch, using a candy dish that had their picture on the inside for an ashtray. It was a wedding gift to them, and Allison liked to keep it stocked with little candies and treats. He didn't care if Allison complained about the smell, especially after what happened earlier. About that time, he heard the doorbell and saw it was AR. He invited his old friend inside and offered him a beer. "What's up, man?" AR asked as he opened his beer. Mark filled him in on what happened earlier in the evening. "Holy," RK said when Mark finished. Mark handed him the container that held the dosed wine. "Think you can get that analyzed?" he asked. AR nodded his head. "Yeah, but it'll probably be Monday or Tuesday before I can get results," Mark said. "I also need everything you can get me on Jake, Marcus, John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins," Mark said. "I understand Jenkins works for Henderson Manufacturing. I don't know what he does there." He pulled out his phone and brought up the video from earlier. He scanned through it until he found a frame that showed all four of them. "Here's a picture of them." "I know it's not the best," he said. "Got it," RK said. "You want surveillance from inside his place as well as yours?" "Yeah, if you can swing it," Mark said. "I've got a key if you want it." "I didn't see any security system, but that doesn't mean anything." RK took the key and looked at it. "No problem," he said. "How did you get this, by the way?" "I took it off Allison's keychain," Mark told him. RK nodded his head. "You realize you probably won't be able to use any video from inside his place as evidence, right?" "Right," Mark said. "I figured as much. This is personal. I really don't give a damn about what's legal or not right now," Mark said. "I understand," RK said. Mark handed RK an extra key to his house. "Here's a key for this place," Mark said. He wrote down a 4-digit number and handed it to him. "And this is the code for my security system. I don't think I'll need the key. If you want, I can set up some equipment while I'm here," RK said, handing the key back. "High-def cameras, audio, the works. Hell, I can even record what gets said on your landline." "Do it," Mark said. "How much is all this going to cost me?" "Don't worry about it," RK said. "You saved my skin over there in Iraq. This is the least I can do for you." "Thanks, old friend," Mark said. "At least let me cover your costs." "All right, if you insist," RK said. "What else have you got? You showed me part of the video you took. Why don't we go through some of it and see if we can get some clues?" Mark pulled the video back up and started it from the beginning. "Stop right there," RK said. Mark paused the video. "Can you back it up just a bit?" Mark did as RK asked, and they watched again. The camera clearly picked up Allison finishing a line of white powder that was laid out on the coffee table. Mark stopped the video. "Damn," he said. "I saw her just as she sat back up, but that clearly looks like coke on the table." Yes, it does, AR said.
Interesting. Have you ever known Allison to use before?
Mark shook his head. No, never. Okay, let's see what else is on here. Mark started the video again, and they could tell when Mark sat on the couch across from Allison. Hold up, Mark paused the video again. What's that? He asked, pointing to something on the love seat. Mark looked closely and saw it was Allison's thong. Holy, he said. I saw that right before I passed out, but I thought I was just seeing things. He started the video back up, and they could tell when the drug had started to affect Mark. They saw the camera pointing up as he laid down and watched as the 4 others looked down at him. They heard Allison ask if he was okay and Jake telling him to take a nap. Then they saw Allison lean over him and whisper in his ear. Mark remembered this, but he had no recollection of what they heard next.
You sure you don't want to tie him up and make him watch us? George asked.
No, Allison said. This is enough for one night. We have all week, you know.
We can always step things up if he doesn't go along with the program, Jake said.
You know John swings both ways. Maybe he could introduce old Mark to the joy of the other side, he added, to laughter. Mark felt his face turn red as he heard Allison join in. Now that's something I'd like to see, she said. Really? They heard John ask.
You'd let me screw your husband in the bum?
Sure, why not, she said. Maybe if you're nice, you can get him to do more. They all laughed again. Wow, I've never done a Marine before, John said. I doubt he can give as good as you, though. Mark fought back the urge to throw his phone through the wall. Seriously, Jake, is he going to be okay? You didn't give him too much, did you? Allison asked. Nah, he'll be fine, Jake said. He'll sleep for about 12 hours, wake up with a bit of a headache. He'll think he just drank too much. Tomorrow, I'll introduce him to the really hard stuff. By this time next week, old Mark here will be a full-fledged coke-sucking drug addict. Maybe I'll even have him work the street for me. Too bad dear old dad isn't around to see his golden boy fall. Is that why you hate him so much? They heard Allison ask. That's all I heard about while I was in college, Jake said. About how good old Mark went to school while serving his country and fighting for America. About how he worked to make something of himself while defending his country. Sometimes I thought Dad would rather have Mark as a son than me. Well, guess what, Dad? I'm Mark's boss now. I have Mark's woman. And by this time next week, your golden boy will be a coke-sucking drug addict. They all laughed at that. Are you boys with me on this? He asked. We are, they heard the 3 of them say.
What about you, ally? Are you with me?
Because if you're not, tell me now, and I promise you'll be on the street with him. I'm with you, sweetie, Allison said. Besides, I've grown to love this too much to walk away from it. They assumed she was referring to Jake's manhood, as we couldn't see what she was referring to. All right then, Jake said. Come on, let's go upstairs and get the real party started. Goody, Allison said as they headed up the stairs. This time, I want you guys to make me airtight. There was no movement in the video, but they could hear the sounds of sex coming from the bedroom. Mark ended the video and put his head in his hands. RK put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I know this is going to be rough on you, but we'll get you through this. Mark nodded his head. Thanks, What are you going to do? I'm divorcing her, there's no question about that, Mark said. I understand, AR said. Why don't you get away from here for a few days? Let me and the boys handle this. What do you plan on doing? It's probably best if you don't know, AR said. I can tell you this, we just witnessed a criminal conspiracy. If I have my way, someone will go to jail. But we need to get you out of here for a bit. But I can help you, Mark said. AR shook his head. No, you're in danger right now, and the last thing we need is for you to go off on any of them.
Remember old Gunny Johnson?
Well, he's retired and in Vegas now. He owes me a favor or three. He said he'd set me up with a place to rack out for a few days if I ever wanted to visit Vegas. I'll call him and see what he can do for you. Mark nodded his head. Okay, let me get the place here wired for audio and video, then I'll head out. You need to maintain, understand? Mark nodded his head. Thanks, RK, you're a good friend. I appreciate it. RK smiled. Semper Fi, bro. Do or die, RK said. Hurrah, Mark said. He went on the back porch with a beer as RK wired the front room and the bedrooms for audio and video. RK also tapped the house phone. He set it up so that all the audio and video would be stored on a cloud server that could be accessed from anywhere on the internet. When he finished, he gave Mark the server address and credentials to access the files. He also showed Mark the switch that would let him turn the surveillance system on and off. I'll call Gunny tomorrow and let you know what he says. One way or another, we're getting you out of here. Don't do anything stupid, you hear me? I hear you. Okay, Mark said. I hope so, Mark, he said. Hang tough, my friend. I'll be in touch. I will, RK, Mark said. Thanks again for everything. After RK left, Mark turned on his computer and pulled up his bank accounts. He still had one open from before he got married that was in his name only. Since he married Allison, he deposited 10% of his earnings into that as a rainy day fund. He had hoped to use the money for a cruise as a surprise gift to Allison, but those days were done. He transferred half of everything out of their joint account into his old account, then paid off and cancelled their joint credit cards. He still had a card in his name only from his original account. Shutting that down, he packed enough clothes to last him a few days and threw the suitcases into his car. Coming inside the house, his gaze fell on the wedding portrait that hung on the wall over the fireplace. Allison looked so beautiful in her wedding dress that day. He was the happiest man on earth and thought he had hit the jackpot. But no longer filled with rage at her betrayal, he grabbed a large hunting knife and shredded the portrait. Once finished, he looked around and pulled down every picture that included Allison. All of them got tossed into the fireplace. He ran upstairs and pulled her wedding dress from the closet, then tossed that into the fireplace as well. He considered burning it all right then, but decided to wait a bit. At that moment, he was filled with blind, seething hatred for her and wanted her to personally witness their marriage going up in flame. Then he had another idea. Grabbing a bottle of beer, he went back to the couch and picked up his phone. He emailed the video to himself and verified it on his laptop. He wrote a very carefully worded letter to each member of the board of directors and David, the interim CEO, explaining in detail what had transpired. He remembered something Alan had told him: the board wouldn't respond too well to threats, but they would respond to a careful and thoughtful analysis of any situation. He didn't know David very well, having only spoken to him a few times, but hoped he was as reasonable as the members of the board. Without threatening anyone, he reminded the board that Jake, as an executive, was required to operate under the morals clause of his employment agreement, and his actions, along with those of his wife, were exactly the kind of things the morals clause was written to address. He also reminded them that their actions were not only criminal in nature, but were the types of things that could spark lawsuits and scandal, the type of scandal that could easily destroy a company like Marcus Financial. He reminded them of his time with the company, telling them of his great respect for Alan. He expressed hope they would do the right thing. He read and reread his letter, editing a few words here and there when he was satisfied. He wrote an email, attaching the letter and the video, and sent it to David as well as each member of the board, telling them he would be on vacation for the week but could be reached by email or phone. He suspected he probably wouldn't hear anything until Tuesday, and by then, he planned to be out of the area. He then sat back, lit up a cigarette, and put it in the candy dish, watching as the heat from the lit cigarette burned into Allison's face. At that moment, that's exactly what he wanted to do to her. He picked up her phone and unlocked it. He knew the code since he set it up for her when he first got it. He went through her text messages and got even more furious. It seemed the two of them had been screwing for at least the last 6 months, but it was only in the last 3 that Allison began openly disrespecting him to Jake. Of course, he thought just the fact that she was screwing him was disrespectful enough. He found a treasure trove of pictures. Pictures of Jake naked. There were other pictures of Jake and Allison playing kiss-a-face and dancing in a nightclub, perhaps in New York, and pictures of Allison's face surrounded by other naked men. Other pictures showed her getting plowed by 2 men at the same time. One of them showed her getting screwed from the rear by a large man while Jake did her face. He wondered who took the pictures and if they were taken with this phone or another device she had. She had also stored videos on the phone, videos of her having sex with Jake and others, including the 3 men at the party. No wonder she acted as if she already knew them, he thought. By then, he had downed 6 beers and smoked half a pack of cigarettes, grinding them out on her face in the bottom of the dish. He looked outside and saw that the sun had already started to rise. Soon, he thought, she would be up and would know that he had left. He figured she would be up in about an hour or 2, so he grabbed his shotgun, made sure it was loaded, and locked both locks on his door. Then he laid back down on the couch with the shotgun next to him and tried to get some sleep. Allison woke up and looked at the clock on the nightstand next to Jake's bed. She saw it was 8:30, so she rolled out of bed and went to the bathroom to clean up. Jake and the others began to stir and were up by the time she got out of the bathroom. Jake threw on a robe and looked at Allison. "You want to go downstairs and get some breakfast started?" he asked. "Mark will probably want some coffee, assuming he's waking up." "Yeah, sure," she said. She tossed on a robe, padded downstairs in her bare feet, and went into the kitchen. She started a pot of coffee and walked into the living room to wake up her husband. Then she realized with a start that he wasn't there. The Afghan she put over him was thrown back, and his shoes were gone. She ran around the first floor, thinking that perhaps he was in the bathroom, but he wasn't there. Looking out the front window, she realized their car was gone. She turned around and saw his ring sitting on her purse, which was laying on its side on the coffee table. "Oh," she gasped. She ran upstairs, yelling. Jake stopped her as she ran into the master bedroom. "What's wrong?" he asked. "He's gone," she said. "What do you mean, gone?" "He's gone, goddamn," she yelled. "He must have woken up in the middle of the night and left. He took the car and left his wedding ring. You better call him and see if you can track him down. Tell him he needs to come pick you up." "Okay," she said, running back downstairs. She put Mark's ring in her purse and looked for her phone, but it wasn't there. She was certain she had brought it with her last night. She never went anywhere without it. By then, Jake was downstairs. "My phone is gone." "That's okay, use the house phone." "You don't understand, I never go anywhere without it. It's full of texts, along with the pictures and videos you sent to me. If he has it, he's probably seen them. Don't worry about it. What we need to do is get him over here. The boys and I will take things over from there. Now, call him." Allison nodded her head and picked up the phone in Jake's living room. She nervously dialed Mark's cell phone, hoping he would answer. "Hello?" Mark said when he answered. He sounded as if he had just woken up. "Mark, sweetie, it's me," she said. "The hell you want?" he growled. Allison recoiled. He had never spoken to her like that before. She realized he must be super pissed. "I had no idea." "Mark, honey, you weren't here when I got up, and I was worried about you. Are you all right? What the hell do you care? Mark, please, you weren't here when I got up, and I was worried about you. Are you all right? What the hell do you care? He growled. Allison, tell me another one, Mark said. We need to talk. Damn right we do. Then I need you to come to Jake's and pick me up, she said. We can talk about this on the way back home. Wrong answer, he said, causing her to recoil yet again. There's no way in hell I'm going over there. If you want to come home, you can walk or call an Uber. The only thing we have to talk about is how we're going to split everything up. What do you mean, split everything up? She asked. That's what usually happens in a divorce, which I don't want. A divorce, please, can't we get through this? I didn't want to be drugged and cucked either. Just get your bum home if you feel the need to talk. But I'm warning you, don't let Jake or any of those others bring you home, and if any of them step foot in my house, I'll blow their heads off, so help me God. You understand me, witch? Oh, okay. I'll call an Uber. Do that, and make sure you either have cash or your ATM card. Why? She asked. Because your credit card doesn't work anymore. Why doesn't my credit card work anymore? Because I cancelled it last night. Oh, she quietly said. By the way, do you happen to know where my phone is? Yeah, it's here on the coffee table, Mark said. Got an interesting collection of pictures, pies, and video, by the way. Now I know what you and W have been doing these last 3 months or so when you claim to be on business trips. They'll really help my divorce case. Oh, my God, she whispered. Mark, I'm really very sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Shut up, witch, and save your worthless excuses for someone who gives a, he said. Now if you want to come and talk to me, do it now while you can and come alone. I'll be there. Mark ended the call, putting the phone down. She looked at Jake. Well? Jake asked. He's not coming, she said. I need to go there and talk to him. All right, we'll take you then, he said. She shook her head. No, he's armed, and he said if any of you show up, he'd kill you. I think he really means it. You didn't hear him. I've never heard him so angry in my life. Jake thought for a moment, then went into his study. He came back out with a syringe in his hand. Here's what we do. Put this in your purse. You call an Uber, and we'll follow you to your place. The first chance you get, you pull the cap off and inject it into his arm, all of it. Then you call me. We'll be close by. We'll come and pick him up and put him in the trunk of my car. What is that? She asked. It's just a special concoction I had made up for him, Jake said. Some narcotics, heroin, and something to put him out. It acts pretty fast. Don't worry, it won't hurt him. Just stick him with it. And when he's out, you call me. Got it? He handed her the syringe and watched as she carefully put it into her purse. Okay, she said. Just promise me you won't hurt him. We'll do our best, right boys, he added, looking at the 3 men, who laughed. He turned back to Allison. Go ahead, call for your ride. She arranged for an Uber driver to pick her up in a half hour and went back upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she got in the car and left. Jake and his 3 friends got into his car and followed Allison, parking about a block away. None of them took note of the white van parked on the street across from Jake's house. A few minutes after he spoke to Allison, Mark's phone rang again. He saw it was RK, so he answered. What's up? He asked. Just wanted to let you know my boys picked up a conversation between your wife and her accomplices, AR said. What? Mark asked. How, you ask? The wonders of modern technology, my friend, he said. You'd be amazed at what we can do these days with a parabolic microphone. Anyway, your wife is getting an Uber, and her buddies are going to follow behind. They plan on dosing you with something then kidnapping you. Whatever it is, it's in her purse. Apparently, she's going to hit you with it as soon as she gets a chance. My boys will follow Jake and his crew when they leave. Damn, Mark said. Yeah, R said. Anyway, just be careful. I'll text you when they leave. Turn on the surveillance gear when she gets there, and I'll monitor it. I'm just down the street. I'll call the cops when the time comes. Just be ready, okay? Thanks, he said. He waited and got the text about a half hour later. On the move. Showtime, Mark said to himself. He knew he had about 20 minutes or so before they arrived. So he stashed the shotgun where he knew Allison wouldn't spot it right away and turned the surveillance gear on. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a plastic Ziploc bag for the syringe and a tissue. He saw the Uber pull up in front of his house and watched as Allison paid the driver and got out of the car. She seemed exceptionally nervous and kept her hand on her purse, which was slung over her left shoulder. He hit the switch to turn on the fireplace and watched as the pictures and her dress started to catch on fire. She walked to the door and slowly opened it. She gasped as she walked in and smelled the cigarette smoke. Mark really didn't care. Her eyes grew wide when she saw the destroyed portrait over the fireplace and got even wider when she looked at her dress and photos, now turning to ash. "My wedding dress," she exclaimed. "Our pictures, Mark, why are you doing this?" Tears were falling down her face, but he was unmoved. "I wanted you to see for yourself what your actions have done to us," he said. She looked at the beer bottles and cigarette butts in her beloved candy dish. "I thought you had a low tolerance for alcohol, and I never knew you smoked." "I used to smoke but quit. As for the other, the truth is, I get downright mean when I get drunk. The last time I got really drunk, I nearly killed a man with my bare hands. A much bigger man than me, by the way. I made a choice to never get drunk again, just like you made a choice to become Jake's witch." "Oh my God, Mark, what have I done?" she said. "You tell me. What the hell happened to you? You used to be the sweetest, kindest, most level-headed person I ever knew. Did you overdose on stupid pills? Did Jake hit you with a Martian 3.0 for Ray? Since when have you snorted cocaine, and who are all these men you've been screwing?" "Clients, mostly," she said quietly. "Jake made me." "Oh, terrific. You know your actions could put Marcus Financial out of business. Tell me, how long have you wanted to drug me and assault me in the rear? Was that your idea, or is that something Jake put you up to?" She looked at him, shocked. "I never," she began before Mark cut her off. "Shut the hell up," he said, pulling out his phone. He played the video and let her hear herself and her accomplices talk as they stood over him. Her face turned white as she heard her own words. "How did you get that?" she asked. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What's important is that David and the members of the board now have this video. The police will have it also. Not only are we getting divorced, but if I have my way, you'll be in prison for a very long time." "I just want to know why," she said. "You don't understand," she said. "It's a long story. Maybe you can tell me one day when I'm not so inclined to wring your scrawny neck," Mark said. He watched her as she started to open her purse, but before she could do anything, he ripped it off her shoulder and dumped the contents on the coffee table. He saw the syringe filled with a dark liquid and picked it up with the tissue he had set aside for that purpose. "Is this what you had planned for me?" he asked. "Do you even know what this is?" "Not exactly," she asked sarcastically. "You mean to tell me you were going to inject this into me without any clue what it really is or what it could do? You're one sick witch, you know that? Did Jake tell you to do this?" She nodded her head. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose if Jake told you to shove a red-hot poker up your bum, you'd do that too, wouldn't you? Let me guess, you're supposed to inject this into me, then call him when I'm down so he can come kidnap me. Am I right?" Ashamed, she nodded her head. "Pretty much. All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to call Jake, put it on speaker so I can hear both sides. You're going to tell Jake you did what he asked. I'll take it from there. Don't you dare tell him I'm waiting for him, got it?" "You want me to set him up?" she asked. "Yes, any questions?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I understand." "Good, now do it. And no tricks." Mark watched as she called and put the phone on speaker. "Jake, it's me, Ally," she said. "It's done?" he asked. "He's out," she said. "Good girl, we'll be right there," he said. She ended the call and looked at Mark. He's going to kill me when he sees you're not really down and out. Tough, he said. Remember, no signals, nothing to let him know the truth, otherwise, I may kill you myself. He sat in a recliner and waited for Jake to come inside. When he saw Jake and his 3 buddies through the window, he closed his eyes but left them open just enough so he could see. Jake opened the door and walked inside. He looked around at the mess before starting to come toward Mark. You did good, he told Allison. Now we're going to put him in the trunk. Jake reached down to lift Mark, but before he could lay a hand on him, Mark opened his eyes. Before Jake could react, Mark brought up one hand and smashed Jake in the throat. Jake reeled back, and Mark stood up. Jake shook his head for a second, but Mark was already on the move and kicked him as hard as he could in the crotch. The other 3 stepped inside to help Jake but were detained by RK's men, who had followed them onto Mark's property. Jake was on his knees, moaning in pain. Mark slipped behind him and pulled out his hunting knife. As he knelt down, he grabbed Jake's hair and pulled his head up while positioning the knife at his throat. Make your peace with God, Jake, Mark growled, because I'm going to cut your head off. Jake pissed his pants in fear as Allison recoiled in horror. Who is this monster? She asked herself. Jake began pressing the knife against Jake's throat when he heard RK's voice from the door. Sergeant shouted RK, getting everyone's attention. Don't do it. Drop the knife. Police are on their way. This dog deserves to die, Mark exclaimed. But not at your hand, RK said. Listen to me, Mark. If you kill him, he'll feel nothing ever again. He'll turn to dust in his grave. But you'll end up in prison. You deserve your revenge, but what kind of revenge is that? This isn't Iraq, buddy. Let the authorities do their job, please. I'm asking you as a friend. Put the knife down and let the police take him in. He'll pay for what he's done. They all will. Mark looked at his friend for a minute before responding. He could feel Jake trembling in fear for his life. He slowly pulled the knife away from Jake's throat and stood up. Behind him, looking down, he saw Jake crying. RK turned him over and had him lay on the floor face down as he zip-tied Jake's hands behind his back. RK then turned to Allison and told her to lay on the floor as well, face down, hands behind her back. She complied and looked in the fireplace as RK secured her hands. Hot tears fell down her face as she watched a picture of her and Mark catch fire and turn to ash. Mark sat on the couch and watched RK make sure both Allison and Jake were secure. The other 3 were in the front yard, similarly secured by RK's men. They heard the sirens of the police cruisers as they stopped in front of Mark's house. Hand me your phone, RK said. I'll go talk to the police before they come inside. Mark nodded his head and gave RK his phone as RK left. Jake lifted his head and turned to face Mark, his smirk was finally gone. Apparently, all it took was the thought that he was about to die. You know, my father always did love you more than he did me, Jake said. Not true, Jake, Mark told him. He always hoped you would mature enough to step into his shoes one day. Would you really have cut my head off? Jake asked. I guess we'll never know now, will we? Mark asked in response. But I guarantee you, where you're going, you'll be surrounded by people who won't hesitate the way I did. And I promise, if you ever come after me like this again, I won't hesitate either. Jake laid his head back on the floor and said nothing. 3 large police officers came into the house and surveyed the situation. Picking Jake and Allison up, they read them their Miranda rights and marched them out to the cruisers. One officer looked at the syringe laying on the coffee table in its plastic bag and picked it up. Is this what they plan to use on you? He asked Mark. Yes, it is, he said. The officer made notes as he took Mark's full statement. After about a half hour, he turned to Mark. You were lucky, you know that, don't you? He asked. No, my fellow Marine had my back, the officer smiled and nodded his head. Semper Fi, the officer said, shaking Mark's hand. Aura, Mark said in response. After they left, RK came into the front room and sat on the couch. "You got another one of those?" he asked, pointing at the beer bottles. "I think I have 1 or 2 left." "Kind of early for this, don't you think?" After this, "No," RK said as Mark handed him a cold bottle. "How are you holding up?" "Okay, I feel like I did back in Iraq, though. I guess I need to decompress a bit." "Yeah, about that. I talked to Gunny this morning. He said he'd take care of everything if you wanted to go hang out in Vegas for a few days. Told me to give you his number. I may just do that. I have a few things to take care of here first, though." RK pulled a couple of cards out of his pocket and handed them to Mark. "There's Gunny's number if you want to call. The other card is for a divorce lawyer. I do work for Michelle Hawkins. She's a real shark, hates cheaters with a passion. I took the liberty of calling her this morning. She said she's expecting you at her office at 8 a.m. sharp Monday morning." "Thanks," Mark said, nodding his head. "For everything." "Hey, Semper Fi, bro, do or die," RK said. Mark chuckled at that. "Aura," he said in response. After they finished their beer, RK stood up and looked around. "Looks like you've got a bit of cleaning to do here, so I'll be on my way. See you, my friend. I'll be by later to get all the surveillance gear." RK left, and Mark turned to the job of cleaning the house. That afternoon, he got a call from David Matt. "Mark, this is David Matt," the older man said when Mark answered the phone. "Yes, Mr. Matt, what can I do for you?" Mark asked. "You can start by calling me David. I got your email and looked at the video. So did the board members. We're all in agreement with what you said in your letter, which I must say was quite impressive." "Thank you, David, you're welcome," he answered. "We also agreed that both Allison and Jake's employment should be terminated immediately, especially given that they're both in custody right now. I'm heading to the county jail to take care of that personally. There's a couple of other things." "What's that?" Mark asked. "We think it would be good if you took a few days to go somewhere, let off a bit of steam. You have someplace you'd like to go for a bit?" "A friend of mine said he'd look after me in Vegas for a few days. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer Monday, then I'll be looking to head out." "Vegas, who?" "Well, I can't think of a better place to get your mind off all this than Vegas. Have a good trip, Mark, and we'll see you a week from Monday." "Thanks, David, I will. There's just a couple of other things. We unanimously agreed that with Jake's departure, you would be the best person for his job," Mark asked. "Absolutely. We're very impressed with the way you dealt with this, and the board has had its eye on you for a while. I don't mind telling you, they're very happy with your work. Of course, there will be a nice increase and a few other benefits along with that promotion. But I think you deserve it." "Thanks, David. Don't thank me just yet. The first thing we need for you to do is oversee the external audit we're going to have done. We're bringing in auditors from an external outfit to go over everything Jake has touched since he's been here. They'll report directly to you, and you'll report those findings, good, bad, or indifferent, to me. I think that's a good idea. I've learned since I sent that email that Jake has had Allison engage in sex with some of our clients." David uttered, "Good God. Well, I'll leave that in your capable hands. In the meantime, you have a good trip, and we'll see you a week from Monday." "With it, see you then, David," Mark said. "Thank you." Following David's call, Mark cleaned the house to the end and then mowed the yard as he usually did on Saturdays. He then called Gunny Johnson and they caught up on everything. "So, would you like to spend a few days and enjoy yourself a little?" Gunny inquired. "Indeed, it's fine, no problem. Come on over, and I'll show you around and get you situated in a comfortable room. And that's you on your own." They laughed at that, saying, "And please remember, this is Las Vegas, not Bangkok." "I'll remember, Gunny," Mark replied. "See you Monday evening." RK stopped by and gathered his gear, saying, "See you, Mark. Just wanted to give you a little update. Gunny said. When police searched Jake's home, they discovered an abundance of drugs, sex toys, DVDs, and other items. It looks like Jake was quite the creep. My friend who works for the force told me he wouldn't be shocked if they found more illicit materials among all the stuff they seized. Damn, RK stayed for dinner, and shortly afterward, mentally and physically spent, Mark fell asleep. The following day, he started packing up everything Allison had, hauling it all into the garage and deciding not to take it all to Goodwill until he was positive she was going to jail. He arrived at Michelle Hawkins's office at precisely 8 o'clock the following morning, where she inspected his evidence and paperwork, took notes while he spoke, explained to him California's divorce laws, explained that everything is usually divided equally, and that since they had no children and the house was his before they got married, the court would probably let him keep the house, given that they had already divided their bank accounts. She said the court would probably give Allison the half. That was still in their account, explained that her adultery could not be brought up in the divorce. Nonetheless, the judge would very likely consider Allison's criminal accusations in any order, and concluded that it was highly unlikely he would have to pay her. I'll draw up the papers and have them served. I'll do everything I can to make this as painless as possible, Michelle stated. I'll give them to the judge if she signs them exactly as they are. After that, you have to wait 6 months. Mark agreed, giving her a retainer for her work, and then, on his way home, he stopped by the county jail to inform Allison that he was going to file for divorce. Sitting at the table, he watched as they brought her out, looking gaunt in the orange jumpsuit that did nothing to accentuate her figure, and they picked up the handset so they could talk, with the thick plexiglass shield standing between them. Hello, Allison. Hi, Mark. I just wanted to let you know that I filed for divorce after seeing an attorney today. She said, I knew you would. When's your arraignment hearing? It's tomorrow morning. We are to be detained without bond, per the request of the prosecutor. That seems like it would work out the best. Tell me something, and I want the God's honest truth. What is that? May I ask? She inquired. How on earth did that happen to you? She cast an embarrassed glance down. At first, everything was going pretty well with the job. In every way, Jake appeared to be an ordinary executive. The real beginning of things came after Alan's death. Jake blamed you for his lack of promotion, which infuriated him. He mentioned that it was likely his father had arranged for you to be hired. That's crazy. Alan always said he hoped Jake would become the CEO one day. I know, she replied. It all started that weekend when we traveled to New York. We were having a good time drinking and dancing at a club with some of our clients, nothing too crazy. Yes, I did engage in some light flirting, but I didn't feel inappropriate. I felt great the next thing I knew, and before I knew it, I was in bed with 2 of the other guys. After a brief pause, she said, the next morning, I realized what had happened and I felt really guilty about it. Jake joined in later. So he blackmailed you, Mark remarked. And I bet he drugged you as well. He did, she acknowledged. He admitted it to me later. Jake then showed me some photos and video that he had taken and threatened to make sure you got them. It's not shocking that they discovered a ton of drugs in his apartment. Did he introduce you to Coca-Cola? Yes, and weed and some other stuff, she nodded. So how many of our clients did you end up doing? She asked. I don't know, several, she shrugged her shoulders. From the video I shot, it seemed to me that you were pretty excited about the whole idea, drugging me, making me into a coke addict for Jake's amusement. That's pretty much what I did whenever we went anywhere. Mark shook his head. Tell me, did the Henderson project really come up at dinner on Wednesday? No, she replied, shaking her head. We were organizing Friday's celebration. So you organized everything ahead of time? Yes, Allison said quietly, nodding her head. I apologize, Mark. Yeah, that's about the first thing you said that I agree with, Allison said. Do you think you'll ever be able to let me go? Before responding, he laughed and said, not no, but hell no. God only knows how many other times you have cheated on me with that a-hole. After that, you and him planned to drug and beat me. You have lost your mind. And don't even try to make friends with me. Mark, I hope it was all worth it for you.
I understand, she said.
Goodbye, Allison.
I'm going home, he said,
packing up and leaving for Vegas as he watched her hang up the phone, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Mark, this is Candy, Gunny Johnson said. She'll be your guide while you're here.
Gunny, this really isn't necessary, Mark said.
Nonsense, son.
After they had dinner, he got together with Gunny Johnson and the two reminisced. After that, Gunny showed him around and gave him some tips for the gambling tables. Finally, he escorted him to his room. After everything your wife has put you through, this is precisely what you need.
They all laughed at that.
Well, I got to go.
Relax, have a good time, and remember, what happens here stays here.
He said, you kids have fun, and walked off.
Mark turned to face Candy.
Please tell me if you're in. He started. Escort, Candy inquired, a prostitute.
Not anymore, because of Gunny.
I'm clean, attending school, and working a real job because of him, who helped me get out of a really horrible situation. All he did was tell me a little about you and ask if I would be interested in hanging out with you. I'll leave and never bother you again if that's what you want.
No, Mark replied.
You're right. You are a very beautiful woman, and right now I could use some company. Would you like to grab a drink or do something else?
That seems pleasant, she grinned.
I have classes today, but I can meet you back here tonight if you want, she said, and they kissed before she left.
Sounds like a plan, he replied.
They went to the club and had a few drinks, then talked and danced for a few hours before returning to his room, where she spent the night helping him forget his problems. The following morning, he woke up to find her beside him. From there, he strolled over to the casino to try his luck at a few games. He took Gunny's advice and left that afternoon with about $300 extra in his pocket. He spent that money on dinner, drinks, and a show with Candy that night, and she once again completely rocked his world. The rest of the week went pretty much as planned. By Friday, he was ready to head home and live the rest of his life. Candy hated to see him go but understood. She gave him her phone number and email address in case he ever wanted to get in touch with her. He liked her, but he never imagined that their relationship would last. After all, he thought, who knows? He smiled as he drove home, thoughts of Candy running through his mind. Once home, he caught up on the news about Allison and her friends. The judge, having seen the evidence presented by the prosecutor, ordered them all to be held without bond. He also got confirmation from Michelle that she had served Allison with divorce papers, which she said she signed right away and had filed with the court. In 6 months, he would be permanently free of her. When he returned to work the next Monday, everything had been moved into Jake's old office, and everyone wished him well in his new role. He settled into his new office and met the external auditors, got them situated, and met his new assistant, Marcia Bodin, who he had known since she first started working for the company a few years earlier, liked her, knew she was married, had received great reviews from her previous supervisors, and was very careful not to bring up his situation. Many irregularities in Jake's paperwork were discovered during the audit. First, he had falsified his expense account on multiple trips that he and Allison had taken. Second, the auditors discovered that Jake had mismanaged some of their clients' accounts. The SEC was notified right away, and federal charges were brought against Jake. Over the course of the next few months, Mark and David had to spend a great deal of time clearing up the mess that Jake had left behind. Fortunately, their prompt response saved them from losing any clients, but it did result in several awkward meetings with understandably upset other executives. Mark, meanwhile, continued to correspond with Candy primarily by email. Eventually, she told him that she had met someone at school with whom she was seriously in love. He was not shocked and wished Candy well. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her co-conspirators, while Allison and Jake's trials dragged on as charges were added and motions were back and forth. Her defense team tried to talk him out of testifying against his own wife, but he persisted, telling her lawyer, "I may not be required to, but I want to. Besides, in a few weeks, she won't be my wife anymore." When the day finally arrived for the jury to deliver their verdict, Mark and David sat in the courtroom and watched as Allison, Jake, and the other 3 men were brought in. None of them could look Mark in the face. The jury was shocked by his testimony, and even more so when they watched the video that Mark had taken that Friday night. The trial had turned into a media circus by the time it was called to order, and when the judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict, the foreman got up and declared that they had. Then, everyone waited in suspense as the judge listed all of the charges against Jake, including conspiracy to kidnap and assault, and charges related to drugs discovered in his townhouse and explicit pictures and videos he had of other women. They were all found guilty of every single charge brought against them. The judge set a date for sentencing, and the 5 now convicted conspirators were led out of the courtroom, Mark and David walking out, squeezing past the phalanx of reporters shoving cameras in their faces. After about 10 days, they were sentenced, and the judge made it clear he was deeply disgusted with all 5 of them, essentially flinging the book at them. 3 of Jake's friends received the lightest sentences, but they were still facing 20 years in prison. Allison received a 25 years to a life sentence. Jake ended up with 50 years to life for his crimes, plus federal charges brought by the SEC, which would be heard in federal court. Allison sobbed as she was led out of the courtroom, while Jake just looked down in shame as he was taken away. A month after the sentencing, Mark was sitting in his office going over some paperwork when Marsha buzzed him on the intercom. It seems that he riled up the wrong people who didn't care for his smug attitude. However, Jake's time in prison ended about 6 months later when he was found decapitated in the shower. "Mr. There's a Dr. Kristen Mar Hurley. 'Cause here to see you." Mark noticed the last name. He ordered her to come in. The door opened, and Mark saw a pretty blonde walk into his office. Her skirt hung just below her knees, and her hair hung down below her shoulders. She grinned and held out her hand to him. "It's great to finally meet you, Mr. Hurley," she replied. "Please call me Mark," he said, shaking her hand and urging her to take a seat. "Do you want to have a drink? Tea or coffee?" "Black coffee would be excellent." "And do give me a call, Kristen." "Marcus," Mark said, looking at her, "are you any relation to Alan?" as his assistant left the office. Mark then asked Marsha to get them each a cup of coffee and sat down. "Maybe his daughter?" She shook her head, grinning. "No, I'm his niece." "I understand. It surprises me that we haven't met earlier. I believed I had gotten to know most of Alan's relatives. I have had a lot going on. I was unable to attend Uncle Alan's funeral because I was in France at the time of his passing." "Well, how may I assist you now?" he inquired. "All I wanted was to meet the man who demolished my cousin, who was a relay dollar hole. I assume that you two still have a lot of love for one another." "No, none," she muttered, shaking her head. "I'm just relieved that he's been made to pay for his crimes at last. I sincerely apologize for what he did to you. I'm sorry, based on what I know about you, none of it was justified. My uncle has told me a lot about you. I see that you work as a doctor. Do you practice medicine?" "No, I'm a business and economics PhD holder. I am a professor at UCLA. I have a lot of the same interests as my uncle, but I lean more academic." She laughed and said, "And no, I'm not interested in moving upstairs into the corner office." Mark didn't want the conversation to end and, to be honest, he was interested in this woman, so they spoke for a while longer before she said she had to return to work. "Listen, Kristen, I'd love to continue this discussion with you, say over dinner. Assuming you don't mind being recognized in public as someone with a menial MBA. There's nothing lowly about being an MBA, and I'd love to be seen with you in public," she said with a sparkling smile. "It would be a great dinner. What about tonight at 7 o'clock at Red Lobster?" "Red Lobster it is," Mark said, taking the card from her. "I'll pick you up at 6:30 if that works." She gave him a card with her address and phone number on it. "Mark, I'll see you then." "It's been a pleasure meeting you," she remarked as she turned to leave. He told her about his experience with Jake and what happened with Allison, and Kristen was shocked but not surprised. That evening, Mark learned from Kristen that Jake attempted to assault her after she had just turned 18. She was ashamed and afraid she might be held responsible, so she never said anything to anyone but avoided Alan and his family as much as she could. She also avoided relationships with men as a result of Jake's actions and spent months in therapy while going through college. You're worthy of much better. After dating for a few months and falling in love, Mark proposed to Kristen, to which she almost threw him to the ground and showered him with kisses. I take it that's a yes. When she finally allowed him to breathe, Mark asked. No, Maureen, that's a big yes. Now, take me to bed and properly ravish me, she commanded. Yes, Mark replied as he led his future wife upstairs. Yes, he thought to himself, everything was looking good. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.